Hello everyone and welcome back to the History of Scotland. My name is Fraser and today we're embarking on a new episode titled Ambitions of Life. This is episode 56 and we'll be covering the final chapter of a remarkable reign. In our last episode we explored the turbulent and eventful reign of Alexander II during his middle years, who steered Scotland through both triumphs and tragedies. We discussed how his first wife, Joan of England, succumbed to tragedy, and how Alexander took the fight to the northern parts of his kingdom against the Kingdom of Norway. It was a reign marked by resilience and determination. After Joan's death, Alexander II found new happiness in marriage with Marie de Coucy. With her, he welcomed his first son, Alexander III, giving him an heir to the throne. With his family secure, one might have expected the king to shift his focus to new conquests and glories. Or would he? Well, today we'll be bidding farewell to our King Alexander II. His reign has been eventful, hasn't it? Many things have been accomplished, and his legacy is undeniable. As is tradition now, I invite you to grab a hot drink, turn up the volume on your radio or headphones, and join me as we head back to Alexander II's reign in 1241, prepared to say goodbye to a king who was every bit as much as a warrior as his father was. As we journey back to 1241, we find a king who, despite his achievements, faced new challenges. The year marked a turning point as Alexander II sought to secure the Western Isles, which remained under Norwegian control. This ambitious endeavour would define the last years of his reign and set the stage for future conflicts under his son and heir. Alexander's focus on the Western Isles was not just about territorial expansion, it was also about consolidating his kingdom and asserting his influence over regions that were historically contested. His actions during this time would have lasting implications for Scotland's future, especially concerning its relationship with Norway and the Western Isles. In addition to external threats, Alexander II also faced internal dissent, particularly from powerful noble families who sought to challenge his authority. However, he managed to navigate these challenges with a firm hand and a keen understanding of politics. As we look back at Alexander II's reign, it becomes clear that he was a king who was driven by ambition and a desire to secure his legacy. He was not content to rest on his laurels, but instead sought to expand his kingdom and secure its future. His reign, though marked by challenges, was also marked by achievements, and his legacy would live on through his son, Alexander III. So, as we prepare to bid farewell to Alexander II, let's remember the man who was not just a king, but a warrior, a knight, a visionary. His reign was one of ambition and determination, and his legacy would shape the future of Scotland for generations to come. Now, without further ado, let's journey back to the final years of Alexander II's reign and explore the events that shaped his legacy. Following years of relatively amicable relations between Scotland and England, tensions rose significantly in 1243 AD, when Henry III of England threatened to invade Scotland. The root cause of this threat was Henry's desire to assert dominance over Scotland and extend his influence again northward. Henry's ambition was fueled by a mix of political manoeuvring and territorial aspirations, as he sought to reassert his control over the lands north of the border. The immediate prompt for Henry's threat came from a complex web of disputes and tensions. One of the key issues was unresolved, the question of homage. Although Alexander II had previously acknowledged Henry's overlordship for certain territories in England, he resisted paying homage for Scotland itself, viewing his kingdom as independent. The unresolved issue, along with disputes over territories like Northumberland and Cumberland, added fuel to the fire. Upon hearing Henry's plans, Alexander II acted swiftly to prepare for a potential invasion. He mobilised his forces and secured alliances to bolster his defences. The Scottish king's quick response was a strategic move to demonstrate that he would not be intimidated by England's show of force. Alexander strengthened his border defences and made strategic alliances with neighbouring barons, ensuring that his kingdom was well prepared for any aggression from the south. Alexander's firm stance, along with his proactive preparations, paid off. When Henry III finally marched north, he found a well-prepared Scottish army waiting for him. Moreover, the English barons, wary of war and sceptical of the campaign's feasibility, were reluctant to support Henry's invasion plans. The lack of enthusiasm among his own nobles further weakened Henry's position. After the initial threat of the invasion by Henry III of England in 1243, the situation remained tense between England and Scotland. However, a combination of factors led to a de-escalation and ultimately to a peace agreement in 1244. The mutual exhaustion and declination for war, both kingdoms were not in a favourable position to sustain the prolonged conflict. The English barons, crucial for any military campaign, were largely disinclined towards a war with Scotland. They viewed Henry's ambitions as unnecessary and were concerned about the costs and risks involved. Alexander demonstrated strategic diplomacy by preparing for defence and showing a willingness to negotiate. His preparations for war deterred the English, while his willingness to negotiate peace opened the door for reconciliation. And the territorial disputes between the two kingdoms were long-standing, particularly concerning the lands of Northumberland and Cumberland. While these disputes remained unresolved, the desire to maintain peace and stability outweighed the desire to contest these lands through conflict. By August 1244, both kingdoms were ready to negotiate peace, yet again, just like they were in last episode. The peace agreement was reached in Newcastle upon Tyre, where Henry III and Alexander II met to discuss terms. The key outcomes of the peace agreement included: Alexander reaffirmed his homage for the lands he held in England, which includes certain northern territories such as Northumberland and Cumberland. However, he maintained his stance that Scotland was independent and not subject to the English crown. To further cement the peace, a marriage alliance was arranged between the two royal families. This alliance helped strengthen diplomatic relations and reduce the likelihood of future conflicts. Both kings agreed to a non-aggression pact, pledging to maintain peaceful relations and respect each other's territories. This agreement helped stabilise the region and prevent further military conflicts. And the peace agreement brought much needed stability to the region, especially the northern territories and the border marches, allowing both kingdoms to focus on internal matters and other external threats. It also set the stage for future cooperation and diplomacy between England and Scotland. The peace agreement at Newcastle marked an important turning point in the relationship between the two kingdoms, moving them away from conflict again and towards a more cooperative and diplomatic approach. But only time will tell if this would last. Now, if we look westward, the Western Isles, also known as the Hebrides, held great significance for Alexander II and Scotland for several reasons. Geographically, these islands were strategically important because of their proximity to the Scottish mainland. Controlling the Western Isles provided a defensive advantage and facilitated control over vital maritime routes. Historically, the Isles were part of the Norwegian domain, but previous Scottish kings had asserted claims over the territories, viewing them as part of Scotland's rightful domain. Politically, the Western Isles were ruled by local lords, who often acted independently or aligned themselves with either the Scottish or Norwegian crowns, depending on their interests. Gaining control over the Isles meant consolidating political influence and reducing the risk of rebellion or foreign invasion. Economically, the Isles were significant due to their fishing and trading potential, making them a valuable asset for the Scottish crown. So given this importance and the importance of the Western Isles, Alexander sought to bring them under Scottish control through a series of diplomatic and military efforts. Initially, he focused on diplomacy, seeking to negotiate with the Norwegian king Håkon IV to purchase or secure the Isles through peaceful means. Alexander recognised that outright military conquest could be costly, and he preferred a diplomatic solution. However, his negotiations were unsuccessful, as Håkon was unwilling to relinquish control of the Isles. In addition to negotiating with Norway, Alexander sought to secure alliances with the local lords of the Western Isles. He attempted to persuade the son of Duncan, Lord of Argyll and the self-styled King of the Isles, to align with Scotland. However, Ewan maintained his allegiance to Norway, which complicated Alexander's plans. These efforts highlighted the complex political landscape of the Isles and the challenges Alexander faced in trying to secure them. When diplomatic efforts failed, Alexander II prepared for a potential military campaign. He assembled a fleet and planned an expedition to conquer the Isles by force, highlighting his determination to secure the Western Isles even if it meant going to war. His shift towards military action demonstrated the importance he placed on these territories and set the stage for future conflicts. When Alexander sought to gain control over the Western Isles, he faced several challenges in his negotiations with Norway. First, there was the issue of Norwegian sovereignty. The Western Isles were under the control of Norway and King Haakon IV, and he was not inclined to easily part with his territory. For Norway, these islands represented an extension of their influence and control in the North Atlantic, making them a valuable strategic asset. Secondly, there were loyalty issues among the local rulers. The Western Isles were ruled by local lords who had a long history of allegiance with Norway. These lords, like Ewan of Argyll, were reluctant to switch their loyalty to Scotland, further complicating Alexander's attempts to peacefully annex a territory. Third, Alexander faced challenges due to competing interests, let's say. Both Scotland and Norway sought to extend their influence over the same region, and this inevitably led to the conflicting interests between them both. The failure of Alexander's negotiations highlighted the estrangement of both sides, as neither was willing to yield. And don't forget, these isles were technically Viking at one point, which is why the historical connection is more with Norway than it is with the Picts and Gaels of Scotland. The ongoing dispute over the Western Isles significantly impacted Alexander II's later years. After his diplomatic efforts failed, Alexander became increasingly focused on resolving the issue through military means. This led to a strain on Scotland's resources as Alexander began preparations for an invasion. The dispute also became a source of political instability. The unresolved conflict with Norway created a sense of uncertainty and tension, both within Alexander II's kingdom and his foreign relations. This instability was exacerbated by the failure of his negotiations and the looming prospect of war. And in his later years, Alexander's health was not as strong as it once was. His health began to deteriorate, and the Western Isles dispute added further stress to his reign. Despite his desire to secure the Isles, Alexander's health prevented him from fully committing to the military campaign he had envisioned. His final campaign to the Western Isles, was cut short, but we'll get onto that very shortly. This entire dispute was ultimately resolved after Alexander II's death and during the reign of his son Alexander III. But it's important to understand that Alexander II thought this would be a lot more easier to gain influence in these isles with their proximity to Scotland. Their Viking-ish Norwegian, Norway, Scandinavian cultures were a lot harder to dislodge than it was, say, in his northern parts of his kingdom when he was dealing with the Gaels and Moray, for example. Anyway, after years of unsuccessful diplomatic efforts to secure the Western Isles from Norwegian control, Alexander decided to take military action in 1249. This decision was driven by several factors. First, obviously, the strategic importance of the Isles, and second, his ailing health. He was getting older and he wasn't going to get any younger, so he needed to commit to an invasion right there and then. So Alexander set sail with the intention of compelling Ewan and other local rulers to swear allegiance to him rather than Norway. The campaign was meant to assert Scottish control over the Isles, aligning them with the rest of the kingdom and establishing Alexander's authority in this contested region. However, during the journey, Alexander's campaign was unexpectedly halted. As he travelled towards the Isles of Carrara, he was struck by a sudden illness, which turned out to be a fever. Despite his initial hopes of recovering quickly, his condition worsened, leaving him unable to continue the campaign. The situation was further complicated when Alexander experienced a disturbing dream, in which he was warned by Saints Columbia, Olaf and Magnus to detest from his planned invasion and deceased. Despite the dream and his failing health, Alexander remained determined to continue the campaign against Ewan and the Norwegian influence over the Isles. However, his fever worsened even more, and he was eventually unable to proceed. This caused him to pass away on July the 8th, 1249, on the Isle of Carrera. His death marks the end of his ambitions and his plans and his invasion of the Western Isles, and left Scotland in a state of uncertainty as he was succeeded by his young son Alexander III. Alexander's death was seen by some chroniclers, particularly in the Hakon saga, as a divine punishment for his attempted invasion. The saga emphasised the warning he received in his dream and portrayed his death as a consequence of his disregard for this divine message. The death of Alexander II in 1249 had a significant impact on Scotland's plans for the Western Isles. Alexander's intention was to bring the Isles under Scottish sovereignty. His untimely death, however, disrupted these plans and left the issue unresolved for a time. Alexander's death left the throne to his son Alexander III, who at this time was only 7 years old. The young king's minority meant that the ambitions of his father were put on hold, as the kingdom was primarily focused on ensuring a smooth succession and maintaining internal stability through a minority. This delay provided a reprieve, let's say, for the Norwegian control of the Western Isles, although the ambition to incorporate the Isles into Scotland did not fade away. The unresolved dispute over the Western Isles persisted during Alexander III's minority. It wasn't until he came of age, that's Alexander III, and pursued his father's ambitions that the issue was finally resolved. The dispute over the Isles and the resulting hostilities would eventually end in around 1263 and 1266 with the Treaty of Perth. But that's something we're going to be telling in the future and during Alexander III's reign. Following his death, Alexander II was buried at Melrose Abbey, a Cistercian monastery located in the Scottish borders. Melrose Abbey was a traditional burial site for Scottish royalty and a place of significant religious and historical importance. Alexander's burial at Melrose Abbey was in keeping with the royal tradition established by his father, William, who was also buried there, if you remember. The abbey, renowned for its beautiful architecture and serene surroundings, served as a fitting resting place for Alexander II, reflecting his connection to the Cistercian order and his contributions to the kingdom. Melrose Abbey continued to be an important burial site for Scottish monarchs and nobility, and the choice to bury Alexander II there highlighted the respect and esteem in which he was held, as well as the abbey's prominence as a royal and spiritual centre in medieval Scotland. Following Alexander II's death in 1249, as mentioned, his only son Alexander III succeeded him as King of England. Now, we'll cover, obviously, the start of Alexander III's reign when we start his episodes, but just to give you a quick snippet, Alexander III, who was born on September the 4th, 1241, was just 7 years old when his father died, making him one of the youngest monarchs in Scottish history to ascend the throne. To the young king's early reign, this was therefore marked by a regency, as he was too young to rule independently. The transition of power after Alexander's death was handled carefully, given the youth of the new king. A regency council was established to govern the kingdom during Alexander III's minority. The council was initially led by Walter Comyn, the Earl of Menteith, and yes, part of the famous Comyn family. He wielded significant power and influence during this period. The regency was also characterised by power struggles among the Scottish nobility, as different factions vied for control of the young king and the direction of the kingdom. The power struggle became particularly pronounced when Alexander III was married to Margaret of England in December 1259, aligning him with the English royal family. And again, this was due to the peace treaty his father had signed. If you remember, I mentioned political marriages. This was one said political marriage. This marriage alliance was designed to foster peace between Scotland and England further, but it also led to increased English influence over Scottish affairs. This influence was resisted by many Scottish nobles, leading to further political instability during Alexander III's minority. Despite the challenges, the regency successfully managed to transition the power to Alexander III, who eventually took control of the kingdom when he was 21 years old. His reign was marked by a period of consolidation and expansion for Scotland, continuing his father's legacy and bringing stability after the tumultuous years of his minority. But this is something we'll cover in his first episode, when it's the minority of Alexander III. Alexander II, however, his legacy was significant. He was remembered as a strong and effective ruler who expanded and strengthened the Scottish kingdom. His reign was marked by an ambition and a desire to secure Scotland's borders and consolidate its territories. The disputes and conflicts he engaged in, particularly over the Western Isles, set the stage for future events and shaped the kingdom's political landscape. Alexander II's efforts to secure the Western Isles and other contested regions demonstrated his vision for a unified and strong Scotland. Although he did not live to see his ambitions fully realised, his legacy lived on through his son Alexander III, who eventually would succeed in securing the Isles, bit of a spoiler I know, and establish a period of stability and prosperity for Scotland. Alexander III would face a lot of these numerous challenges that Alexander II faced during his early years of reign. The significant challenges of being young, becoming king at 7. Well, the period of minority was characterised by these power struggles among the Scottish nobility as different factions sought to control him. Additionally, Alexander III's early reign faced the challenges due to the political instability and shifting allegiances among the nobility, especially after his marriage to Margaret of England. Another major challenge was maintaining the territorial integrity of the kingdom. Alexander II had pursued ambitions and ambitious goals, such as consolidating the Western Isles, which remained unresolved at the time of his death. The young king had to navigate these unresolved issues along with the external threats from neighbouring kingdoms. Alexander II's reign set the stage for his son's future rule in several key ways. First, Alexander II's ambitions for territorial expansion and consolidation created this framework for his son to follow in. Secondly, Alexander II's emphasis on a central authority provided a model for his son to follow. During his reign, Alexander II had maintained firm control over his kingdom, dealing with internal dissent and external threats with a firm hand, as we've seen in the past few episodes. This emphasis on a strong leadership influenced Alexander III's approach to governance, particularly as he sought to assert his authority during his minority and beyond. Finally, Alexander II's diplomatic efforts, such as a peace agreement with Henry III of England, provided a foundation for future diplomatic relations. The marriage alliance between Alexander III and Margaret of England, which was initially arranged during Alexander II's reign and during the Treaty of Newcastle, was a continuation of this diplomatic strategy aimed at fostering peace and stability within the British Isles. But letting the English have a bit of a say in Scottish politics would come to bite Scotland back later on, as I'm sure we're all aware. By understanding the challenges that faced Alexander II during his reign, one can better appreciate the context and challenges that Alexander III would ultimately face as he continued his father's legacy and forged his own path as King of Scotland. But as I keep mentioning, we will go through all of this when we return to the political narrative of Alexander III's reign. And to give you a quick little taster of that, the plan is to split Alexander III's episodes into 4 episodes. The first episode being his minority, called The Young King, then Trouble in Paradise, then Alexander III and his fight for legacy, and then the sadly named End of the House of Dunkeld. Because yes, after Alexander III dies, it would go into a bit of a succession crisis with Margaret, and I'm sure we all know what happens then with William Wallace and the invasion of England and the fight for independence, etc. So we've got a lot of stage setting to do before we get there. So that's why Alexander III's reign will be around 4 episodes in length. Anyway, if we now look at how Alexander II was perceived by chroniclers, the English chronicler Matthew Paris, who lived during the 13th century, provided a vivid description of Alexander II in his chronicle, the Chronica Majoria. Paris depicted the Scottish king as a red-haired, a distinctive physical trait that set him apart. This characteristic was highlighted in a story where Paris described King John of England taunting Alexander II as a red fox cub. This description gives us a glimpse into how Alexander II was perceived by contemporaries, as well as the nature of his relationship with the English crown. The context of King John's taunt towards Alexander II came during a time of heightened tension between England and Scotland. Alexander II, as we know, ascended the throne in 1214, at a time when England and Scotland had a tumultuous relationship. King John, who ruled England, was known for his conflicts with the Scottish kings, and his disdain for Alexander II was evident in his taunt. According to Matthew Paris, King John referred to Alexander often as the red fox cub, especially during his disputes, trying to belittle him based on his distinctive red hair. The taunt underscored the animosity between the two kings, as well as John's general disregard for the Scottish monarchy. This animosity was part of a broader pattern of conflict, as John sought to assert dominance over Scotland while Alexander II resisted such attempts. Now, in the Haakon saga, a Norse saga chronicling the life of King Haakon IV of Norway, it provides a detailed account of Alexander II's intentions and challenges regarding the Western Isles. In the saga, Alexander II is depicted as a formidable king who sought to bring the Western Isles, which were under Norwegian control, under the dominion of Scotland. The saga portrays his ambitions as a significant threat to Norway's interests in the region. According to the saga, Alexander II's intentions were driven by a desire to consolidate and expand his kingdom. He initially attempted to secure the Western Isles through negotiation, but when diplomacy failed, he turned to military action. The saga highlights Alexander's determination to assert Scottish control over the Isles, framing him as a tenacious and ambitious monarch. The significance of the dream involving St. Columba, St. Olaf and St. Magnus in this saga, Alexander II's efforts to invade the Western Isles were uninterrupted by this prophetic dream. In the dream, he is warned by these three St. Columba, St. Olaf and St. Magnus to leave and not do his planned invasion of the Isles. Saints, significant religious figures in both Scotland and Norway, serve as divine messengers in a narrative cautioning Alexander against his ambitions. The dream's significance lies in the portrayal of Alexander II's actions as going against divine will. The saint's warning is interpreted as a clear message that Alexander should not proceed with his planned invasion. Despite the dream and the advice of his men, Alexander II chose to disregard the warning and continued with his endeavour to take control of the Isles. Shortly after, he fell ill and died, which the saga portrays as divine retribution for his disregard of the saint's warnings. The dream involved the three saints serves as an important narrative device in the saga, illustrating Alexander II's hubris and highlighting the religious beliefs of the time. The saga presents Alexander's death as a consequence of his defiance and divine guidance, emphasizing the power of saints and the importance of heeding prophetic warnings. Through this portrayal, the Haakon saga underscores the challenges Alexander II faced in his efforts to secure the Western Isles and frames his failure as a moral lesson, reflecting the medieval mindset that divine will play a crucial role in the affairs of kings and kingdoms. The accounts of these chroniclers, both English and Norse, played a significant role in shaping the perception of Alexander II of Scotland. These chroniclers provide a distinct narrative that highlights different aspects of Alexander's character, ambition, and challenges. Together, these chroniclers shaped the perception of Alexander II, who was a complex and multifaceted monarch. He was seen as a bold and ambitious king, willing to challenge his neighbours and assert his authority. However, His ambitions were also seen as overreaching, particularly in the context of the Western Isles dispute. The chronicler's accounts highlight both the strength and weaknesses of Alexander's character, painting a nuanced picture of a king who was much as a warrior as he was a statesman. These narratives contributed to his legacy as a notable Scottish king, remembered for his boldness, ambition, and obviously in the end, his ultimately tragic demise. Well, there we have it then. That is Alexander II's reign done and dusted. What a journey it's been. Sorry it's only really been 3 episodes covering him, but believe it or not, there wasn't actually a lot of detail I could go through with all the historical works I looked through. But regardless, Alexander II certainly ranks as one of the more interesting kings of Scotland for me. He was a steadfast ruler who maintained the course of his kingdom and ensured that the succession was secured. With his ambitious plans and bold actions, Alexander II left a legacy that set the stage for the future of Scotland. Now, if you do have the time, I would love to hear what you think about Alexander II and his reign. Do let me know your thoughts on Facebook or Twitter or even on an email. To help me create these episodes on Alexander II, I relied on several key historical sources. These include the works by Matthew Paris, which offered valuable insights into the perspective of England during Alexander II's reign, the Harkonnen saga, which was a Norse saga chronicling the life of King Haakon IV, as I said, and then there was also the Chronicle of Melrose, a title that we haven't heard quite some time now. It was an important Scottish chronicle that gave us insights into the domestic affairs of Scotland during this time. In terms of more modern historical works, I found some that also contributed significantly to our understanding of Alexander II's reign. Richard Orham's book, Alexander II, King of the Threshold of a Golden Age, provides a detailed account on Alexander II's reign, highlighting his accomplishments and challenges. J.W.S. Barrow's Kingship and Unity, Scotland 1000 to 1306 offers a broader context for Alexander II's reign. And Michael Lynch's Scotland, A New History provides an insightful overview of Scotland's history, including the reign of Alexander II and his impact on his country's development. An extra book shout out this week from Olivia, who posted it on the Facebook group, which is the book Clash of Crowns, The Battle of Byland 1322, which discusses Robert the Bruce's forgotten victory over the English. Now obviously we're going to be touching upon Robert the Bruce and the succession and, well, the great fight for independence. This episode, let's just have a quick look, is going to take around... it's going to be about 24 episodes discussing the succession crisis. We'll be doing an episode that will introduce the succession crisis, we'll go through all of it, and then we'll do an episode that will conclude the succession crisis. But anyway, if you want to do a bit of homework and get ready for that, which will hopefully be starting around July, August time, please do have a look at getting that book. It's definitely on my wish list, and it's definitely something I'm going to get as well. Anyway, if we turn ourselves back to next week, we are going to take a bit of a detour and catch up with the Scottish noble families during Alexander II's reign. This will be covered in 2 episodes. After that, we'll have more special episodes lined up before returning to our political narrative with Alexander III. Upcoming episodes include History of Scotland podcast episode 59, Parliament of Scotland in the 13th century, where we'll learn about the Scottish Parliament. Then we have got episode 60, Lords, Clans and Merchants in the 13th century, giving another general understanding episode of the Lords, the Clans and the Merchants in the medieval Scotland in the 13th century. The reason for this detour, I may have said it earlier in this episode, is to set the scene as best I can for the famous Wars of Independence. I'm nervous to tell the story because it's been told so many times now, both in media and in podcasts, but hopefully I can do it some justice. Anyway, our podcasts are out weekly, with our next episode being released next week, as we do 3 podcasts a month. Remember to give us a follow on Twitter at the History of SE1, that is at the History of SE1, or check out our Facebook page at the History of Scotland podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for the latest 5-star reviews on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean and many other great podcasting sites. So, until next week guys, have a great week, stay safe and I'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.